Having personal experience with Judge Merchan, he's a very headstrong judge, and he's going to do what he feels is appropriate. So I think it is a possibility that he will move forward with sentencing.
Donald Trump is still facing criminal charges after being elected the 47th president of the United States, but reports suggest the cases against him may now be wound down. In May, he was found guilty of 34 counts of falsifying business records to commit election fraud. And if nothing changes, he's due to be sentenced later this month. So what will happen next? What should happen next? Let's speak to Deborah Blum, who is a New York attorney. Good evening to you.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you, Deborah. And we're also joined by Amy Tarkanian, the Republican strategist. Good evening, Amy.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
We should say that Trump did face 91 charges, convicted on 34. He's seen 45 charges dismissed in total. So we know that huge number of 90 has, over the period of time, reduced somewhat. But there is this case of 34 counts of falsifying business records to commit election fraud, found guilty of that. Give me your opinion, Deborah Blum, on now that he's president-elect, but not the actual president just yet until he's inaugurated, whether that should signal an end to these charges, to the sentencing.
As a criminal defense attorney, you really see different things. This is probably one of the most unique situations that any criminal defense attorney has ever seen. So the question now becomes, will Judge Juan Merchan apply presidential immunity because President Trump is president-elect? That's one question. There's also a motion pending before him because of a Supreme Court decision pertaining to President Trump or President-elect Trump and whether he should have presidential immunity. So that's also something that Judge Merchan is considering. There are also his defense counsel, regardless if those motions are granted, defense counsel will likely ask the judge to delay the proceedings and allow for them to appeal the case itself. In my opinion, of all the pending cases against him, the New York case was the weakest case, and there are many appealable errors. So in a case where you have such a strong appeal, the judge might agree, although that's rare, to postpone sentencing to allow for the appeal. That is incredibly rare, and I don't know that it's going to happen here. We might see the judge move forward with sentencing on November 26th, and he could potentially sentence him up to 4 years in jail. And as a federal president of the federal government, he cannot pardon himself for a state crime.
Okay, that is interesting. Let's go to Amy Tarkanian there. What do you want to see happen, Amy? We've got this sentencing, could well go ahead on November the 26th if the appeal makes no difference.
Well, everything that she just laid out, that's a lot to take in. And you have an individual who's now going to be the leader of the free world once again, that you would want to lead by good example. And perception is also very important, and to set precedent for further presidents. Now, he is one of 4 presidents historically that have actually been impeached as well at one point. So he doesn't have a very good track record, which is disappointing. And so the fact that we now have somebody coming into office once again with all of these accusations that are still setting aside, I think it's important that even though we have a policy against prosecuting a sitting president, I would hope that they would be able to finalize, as she mentioned, and maybe rush and move forward with completing some of these situations. Because if you just push them to the side and you say, we're going to ignore these very serious accusations, I think that sets a terrible precedence.
There are a couple of options here. One is that the sentencing goes ahead, but presumably, Deborah, if he's sentenced, he can try and set aside or try and set in motion a process of being immediately pardoned. The other option is that this is just scotched completely. Sentencing is scotched, it goes away forever. And the third option, I suppose, is that sentencing is delayed until the point where Donald Trump is no longer president. So in other words, it's knocked down the line some 4 or 5 years. What do you feel is the most likely of those outcomes, Deborah?
Having personal experience with Judge Merchan, he's a very headstrong judge, and he's going to do what he feels is appropriate. So I think it is a possibility that he will move forward with sentencing. I do believe that he will consider the presidential immunity from the Supreme Court and render a decision whether or not he feels that applies to the instant matter, because these were acts that occurred prior to President Trump being president. So that is one possibility.
So that's because the charges relate to a period before Donald Trump became president in 2016, because we've got this hush money payment to Stormy Daniels. That was all, because of the impending election, wasn't it?
Yes. I mean, of the cases that were pending against him, this was definitely the weakest. Their federal agencies declined to prosecute it, including the federal government, but as well as the prior New York County District Attorney. It wasn't until we had the current District Attorney that they decided to move forward with this case. But that happened. They moved forward with it. There are many appealable errors, like I said before. There's a potential that the judge should have recused himself. There are rulings that Judge Merchan made during the trial that he should not have made. There are so many reasons why this conviction should not stand. So I'm assuming that he's going to be taking all of that into consideration when making the determination whether he's going to dismiss these 34 felony counts that President Trump was convicted of, or if he's going to move forward. Then his choices are to sentence him to no jail, to probation, or to a period of incarceration.
I wonder if this makes Trump even more popular, Amy Tarkanian, if he is sentenced.
Well, yes, and actually, many of his followers believe it's political persecution, and so if he were to be given a jail sentence, I fear that there would be civil unrest to some extent, and so if he were to be found guilty in these situations, then I would hope that the judge would take that into consideration and not sentence him for prison time, but punish him in some other way where he could still move forward and serve. Because I feel we are so divisive. This is just terrible. It's terrible timing.
Are there any other outstanding charges against Donald Trump? We've been talking about these 34 that he's been found guilty of, and he's awaiting sentencing, which is due to take place on the 26th of November. Are there any other charges outstanding against Donald Trump, Deborah?
Yes, there are. So there were 2 federal cases, one in Florida, which related to the documents that
the Mar-a-Lago papers, yeah.
Yes, from Mar-a-Lago. And then there's one that is pending in Washington, D.C. about January 6th. The one in Florida has been dismissed. I believe that the federal government, the Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney's Office was in the process of appealing that. But it's likely that the federal cases, because he is going to become president again, will be vacated and the D.C. case will not be prosecuted. This is a lot of politics at play. We know that the Democrats want to move forward. They want to see Trump going through these continued legal battles. But at the end of the day, there's a constitutional application of whether or not his presidential immunity is now going to apply because he is going back in office. And again, this is an incredibly unique and unprecedented matter. So I think that legally this is incredibly interesting, and I'm curious to see what the results are. And then it's also going to be whether or not, the Department of Justice just decides to terminate it because ultimately Trump, once he becomes president, would have that power himself to pardon himself if it moves forward. Then there's the case in Georgia, which is a state case. So again, because he's the federal government, he does not have the power to pardon himself in Georgia. But if there's a Republican that he is friendly with who has the ability to pardon him in Georgia, then he would also likely receive a pardon there.
He could he not, Amy Tarkanian, just get rid of Jack Smith? He's the special counsel who has sort of been doggedly behind that DC case on January the 6th. Could he just simply dispense of Jack Smith's services to end that one?
Now, this is where he needs to be really careful. And unfortunately, I don't believe he's going to mind his P's and Q's because he cannot fire Jack Smith on his own. It would have to be his attorney general that he appoints. Now, of course, he's going to want to appoint people who are going to have his back. So I would still see that as a big possibility happening of them removing Jack Smith at some point. But, he has his spokespeople that are out there saying, hey, it's time to unify. We want to move forward. We're ready to work together. But yet Donald Trump himself is still out there lashing out. And I understand he's angry. I get it. He has a lot on his plate. And he feels that this is all, once again, it's all political. So whether if he is guilty or innocent, he's feeling that this is all piled up on him just for political purposes. So he's now out there stirring the pot even more so and threatening his political opposition, to take them to court or to fire them or to throw them in jail. And so I wish he would stop with the rhetoric because all that's doing.
But it's just part of his brand, isn't it, though? Yeah. Look, let's just finish this with your instinctive feeling about what's going to happen. First of all, with the hush money case, the sentencing, he's already been found guilty, of course, 34 charges. Sentencing on that. And then let's just cover Mar-a-Lago, the DC Jan 6th case and the Georgia election interference case. What do we think is going to happen with those? You can either break them down separately or you can give me a sweeping assessment of all of them. Deborah Blum.
I believe that the Georgia case will likely go away. I think it's 50-50 what's going to happen in New York. As I said, Judge Juan Merchan is completely his own individual who is going to do what he feels he should do. I mean, he should have recused himself as the judge in the matter, and he did not do that. So I think it's possible that he's going to move forward. Prior to the Supreme Court's ruling, I think I had it on good authority that he was going to incarcerate Trump. But now that there's the Supreme Court ruling and the possibility that presidential immunity could be applied, that he might dismiss the case.
All right.
Or it's going to be appealed.
Okay. And briefly, Mar-a-Lago, those papers that he hung on to and shouldn't have, and then the DC Jan 6 case, are they both going to go away as well, do you think?
The one in Florida has already pretty much gone away, and it's things that other presidents have done. So I don't understand why that was such an uproar. So in terms of Georgia, yes, I also think that that's going to go away, especially given the fact that that's a Republican-friendly state, and there are also issues in that case with the judge.